My name's Drew, and for the past 15 years I've lived on a 40-acre ranch just outside the sleepy little town of Farage. It was the kind of place where people waved from their trucks, and the biggest scandal used to be the annual chili cook-off judging fiasco. I grew up on this land, running cattle and helping my folks grow feed corn. After they passed, I took over the ranch and turned the back 20 into a licensed wildlife preserve. It's quiet, legal, and until recently peaceful. Then Abigail Foster moved in. 3 years ago, the edge of my property got swallowed up by a new pre-planned community with matching mailboxes and HOA dues the size of small car payments. Abigail strutted in with her pressed linen pantsuits and a clipboard, declared herself the savior of suburbia, and took one look at my ranch like I'd parked a junkyard next to her French garden. She started small notes about the state of my barn, letters about how my fencing clashed with neighborhood harmony. I ignored her, pinned her notes to the dartboard in my office, and kept to myself. But Abigail wasn't built for being ignored. She escalated. She sent newsletters through the HOA warning about blight zones, meaning even flew a drone over my property under the pretense of wildlife research. I shot it down, buried it in the compost. Figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. One Saturday afternoon, I came back from the vet shadow. One of the wolves had a check-u-pan spotted smoke rising near the eastern gate. For a moment, I panicked. Thought it was a fire. But no, it was something worse, a birthday party. Folding tables, a bounce house, ribs on the grill, beer being passed around like confetti. 50 strangers were tromping through my pasture like it was a public park. And in the middle of it all stood Abigail wearing a sash that read "Fabulous at 50" and a smug grin that made me itch. I walked right up to her and asked, "What in the HOA hell do you think you're doing?" She looked at me like I'd asked her to solve calculus. "Oh, Drew, don't be so dramatic. There's plenty of space. You weren't even using this field. That's because it's a protected area." I pointed to the hatch cover under the bounce house. "There's a water line under there feeding the entire aquifer, not to mention my animals. You've got propane tanks 5 feet from a groundwater source." She waved me off with a forkful of coleslaw. "You should be thanking me. This is good for morale." I gave her 10 minutes. Told her to pack up her circus or I'd call animal control. She laughed. "What are you gonna do, sick a chicken on me?" I turned and whistled. Out came the wolves. Technically, they're not mine. They belong to a breeding and conservation program I partner with, fully licensed and regulated by the state. But to Abigail and her crowd, they might as well have been saber-tooths. The wolves didn't bark or snarl. They just emerged from the tree line with that slow, regal gait like they knew they owned the place. One sniffed the rib table. Another stared Abigail down. She froze, eyes wide, a toothpick still stuck in her potato salad. A low growl just enough to rattle nerves sent her tripping backward into a cooler. Pandemonium erupted. Guests screamed, chairs toppled, someone lost a shoe. Within minutes, the field was empty except for a few balloons and a half-eaten cupcake. I sat on the fence and laughed until I cried. The next morning, I woke up to a drone buzzing over my porch. Not just any drone, a fancy one with a camera doing slow sweeps like it was casing a bank. I didn't shoot it down this time. I filed an FAA complaint instead. It was her second offense. Then came the emails. Apparently, Abigail had decided my wolves were a public menace. She accused me of biological warfare and claimed I'd weaponized conservation. She even cited an obscure HOA rule about predatory animals which didn't apply to my land at all. I'm not even in their tax district. I printed it out and highlighted the phrase feral ground. Then I added it to a file labeled, in thick red marker, Evidence, Abigail Foster's Meltdown. Quietly, legally, I made my next move. I contacted the FAA again, cited her low-altitude drone flight over a restricted wildlife area. Turns out she was already on their internal watch list. I submitted trail cam footage of the drone hovering over my enclosures. Meanwhile, Abigail doubled down. Her next HOA newsletter included a public safety bulletin with an aerial map of my ranch. She circled the wolf enclosure in red and stamped it Danger Zone. I nearly snorted coffee through my nose. Then animal control came knocking. 2 guys in khakis, all business. I invited them in, showed them my permits, vet records, and the state partnership documents. Gave them coffee. Even let them meet the wolves through the double-gated fence. One of them laughed. "You're the most by-the-book guy we've met all month." They left with smiles and zero concerns. 3 days later, a cease and desist letter from Abigail's lawyer arrived. It accused me of environmental endangerment and psychological harassment. My own lawyer, Janinian Ice Queen in Pearls, who once made a zoning board cry read it and said, "This is adorable." She fired back a 15-page rebuttal with maps, statutes, and receipts. Within 48 hours, the HOA had received a legal education they weren't ready for. Abigail went quiet for a day. Then the drone returned. This time I was ready. I waited until it hovered low, then stepped onto the porch, raised my shotgun, and fired. One shot. The drone spiraled and crashed into the pasture. I bagged it and brought it to the sheriff. Later that night, a young HOA member knocked on my door, eyes darting. Off the record, he whispered, "I didn't vote for any of this. She's scaring the board." He handed me a copy of the last HOA meeting minutes. Abigail had claimed I was mounting a hostile occupation and wanted a rotating patrol to monitor my land. Patrol. I watched them the next afternoon, 3 people in neon vests pacing the sidewalk, clipboards in hand. I made popcorn. One of them, Todd, finally asked if my wolves were properly contained. "They're more law-abiding than your board," I told him. But Abigail wasn't done. She hosted a safety briefing at the community center. Passed out flyers titled, "The Predator Problem Next Door." Claimed she lived in fear. Said I was an unlicensed zoo. I got a copy from the feed store clerk who couldn't stand her either. So I escalated. Janine sent a cease and desist for defamation. I started digging literally. Installed a new, fully electrified fence along the property line. Double-gated. State approved. With signs that read, "Wildlife Area, do not enter." Then I called in a favor from a local reporter whose dog I'd once rescued. She ran a story. Rancher upgrades wildlife sanctuary amid HOA pressure. Featured aerial shots taken legally and an interview with a wildlife official praising my conservation efforts. It aired the day after Abigail's rally. She lost it. Sent out a HOA memo calling me a media manipulator. Her board started backing away. Then came the final act. A city inspector showed up, clipboard in hand. "Got a complaint that your animals aren't fed properly. Mind if I look around? Names start with A, end with lunatic?" He chuckled. I gave him the full tour. The wolves came up, healthy and calm. He left with a nod and a quiet warning, "She's at City Hall. Planning something bigger." He wasn't wrong. Abigail tried to get my ranch rezoned. Claimed it was a commercial enterprise. Said I was profiting off the wolves despite not charging a dime. A hearing was scheduled. Janine showed up with a binder that looked like a weapon. During the hearing, Abigail ranted about how she saw a wolf from her kitchen window, turned out to be a stray dog with mange, and claimed emotional trauma from silhouettes at dusk. Janine calmly dismantled her. Presented every permit, complaint dismissal, FAA report, and even receipts showing Abigail misused HOA funds. Silence followed. The commission sided with me. Declared the matter resolved. Abigail resigned from the HOA the next week in a dramatic email titled, "A Stand Against Tyranny." No one cared. Her lawn grew wild. Her mailbox overflowed. The new newsletter had gardening tips and corny jokes. I got my land reclassified as a protected conservation area. Tax breaks. Legal immunity. Total autonomy. And Abigail? She vanished. Until 2 months later when a plain envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo of my ranch from a new drone. Better camera. Sharper image. At the bottom, scribbled in Sharpie, "You'll slip eventually." I stared at it. Walked outside. Whistled once. The wolves appeared, watchful and calm. I smiled. Let her try.